Yeah, okay, you've heard it before, that Pokemon cards were better before they became valuable and now that it's all about money. But really? Like, think about it. Was Pokemon better before that? What I have never really understood about this, and it's always kind of confused me, is why would you want to pay for a booster box and willingly know that all the cards inside have no inherent value? Doesn't that make your purchase a pure waste of money? Look, I mean, I may be wrong with my thinking here, but that's really never made sense to me. I mean, to me, that just sounds like you're literally burning money. Why wouldn't you want the cards inside the pack to be valuable? That way, at least you know you have value inside the pack. There's some extra flair to the purchase. I mean, this has always been a slightly strange take for me. And I mean, I understand that some chase cards are incredibly expensive, and I'm not going to pretend like hundreds of people aren't priced out in the market. And honestly, this area would make sense to me if it was like people wanted to use the cards in their deck and then they're completely outpriced. Then this becomes a problem as the card's utility cannot be seen due to some like scummy business practice, right? But Pokemon traditionally are actually really good at catering to both players and collectors in this regard. I mean, something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Deserves this criticism far more than Pokemon. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is infamously known for releasing meta-shattering cards that are chase cards in a new set with no other alternatives to acquire the card. This means that meta decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! When they're released exceed $1,000 from the get-go. So I mean, being priced out of using the best decks is a real problem, and it is a bit of a scummy practice because they know how desperate players are to acquire the cards to be used competitively, and then they use that to their advantage. I mean, if players were complaining about that, it really does make sense to me because the card's utility in which it wants to be used for the deck cannot be fulfilled because a business practice has stopped it from being fulfilled. But for Pokemon, nearly every chase card in a set is designed for the collector in mind. Pokemon actually do a fantastic job to cater to both the players and the collector audience. Like if we currently look at Iron Crown's Special Illustration Rare, yes, this card is very expensive. However, this card is also currently used within the meta for competitive TCG players. Now, you don't actually need to get the Special Illustration Rare to add it to your deck. You have other options. With Iron Crown EX81, that can be found for $3, and if you wanted a little bit more of an upgraded version, you can buy Iron Crown EX191, which costs around $7, and it gives you a little bit of an extra flair to your deck, and maybe you can flex at a tournament, so you've got a little bit of a cooler option than the regular version. And then finally, Pokemon add the Special Illustration Rare, which has the collector in mind, not the competitive player. The competitive player has their lower tiered versions, and Pokemon make sure you can have easy access to these. Like $3 for a single that's used in the meta is very reasonable. For Yu-Gi-Oh!, that's completely unheard of. So the Special Illustration Rare isn't really going to be placed in a player's deck, and if a player does decide to use it within their deck to show off, that's really the player's own fault, as they have two lower tiers of rarity to choose from. So the complaint of Pokemon cards being too expensive doesn't really make logical sense, as players aren't priced out of their competitive decks. Having options for both players and collectors is really awesome, and I personally would hate to buy a booster box and have zero valuable cards within it, or even know that there's no valuable chase cards within the set. To me, that would ruin the experience for me, not because of money, but because that's a fundamental aspect of Pokemon. And I think people sometimes forget how much Pokemon values rarity. It's actually part of their brand identity, and it's what makes Pokemon so unique. Rarity in Pokemon has always been a thing. It's not something new. When Pokemon Gold came out in the 90s, they've always had a knack for incredibly rare things. It's always been a thing. Like look at shiny Pokemon within old school Pokemon games. You have a 1 in 8,192 chance to find a shiny Pokemon. 1 in 8,192. And to be honest, I would hate it to be any other way because it's what makes Pokemon stand out within their franchise. They add complex levels of rarity within their games and within their TCG. I actually did make an earlier video and I gave away an EB Games exclusive Umbreon promo to whoever could guess what my favorite Pokemon card is. And after many attempts, it was finally guessed. And my favorite Pokemon is, and it always will be, Milotic. Nothing will ever take Milotic's place as my favorite Pokemon, and here's why. So when I was 8 years old, I had a huge case of asthma attacks, right? And these constant asthma attacks made me need to miss school, and I had to miss school a lot. Though during one winter, it got incredibly bad and I was set to stay home for 3 weeks. Now, during this time, I was not meant to do much activity to help my lungs recover, though playing Pokemon on my Game Boy Advance was one of the only things I had going for me. Like, I actually missed my friends so much. It was actually a pretty tough time, right? Though, I'll never forget playing Gen 3. And there was this one morning while I was off from school, and while I was playing Gen 3, I was actually watching the Pokemon anime at the same time, and Milotic appeared. And dude, I will never forget that. I literally was looking all over my Pokedex in game, and I wanted to see how could I add Milotic to my team. I had no idea how to find it. I didn't even know it existed. I just saw it on the anime right there. Now, for those who have never played an old school Pokemon game, getting Milotic in Gen 3 was ridiculously hard. Like, I mean, it was close to impossible. So, with all this time on my hands, I was a pretty resourceful young kid. So I loaded up the dial-up internet and I searched how to catch Milotic. And I found a huge game facts page with details on how to catch Feebas, which is the pre-evolution of Milotic. Now, guys, this wasn't some beautifully designed UI with easy to follow instructions and all the steps laid out for you. If you've ever seen old school game facts walkthroughs, it looks like a bunch of website code smashed onto white paper. But I read through the walkthrough and I read how I needed to catch Feebas, and what was required is I had to fish on Route 119 of the game. And Feebas only appears on 6 out of 400 tiles within the whole water section of that route. Meaning you need to fish on each individual tile to try find it, and there's only 6 tiles where Feebas can appear. Now, I didn't have a YouTube video to prove this. I just had to go off this dingy GameFAQs page I printed, but I trusted the process. I sat there fishing on every single tile, thinking I'd eventually hit a Feebas, and I would slowly fish on each and every individual tile. And I remember at one point thinking that it would never come, but I just kept pushing. And you know what? After hours, a Feebas actually did appear. Now, here's the worst part, right? Not only do you need to catch this Feebas, which is hard enough in itself, but to level it into a Milotic, they had a new system where you had to feed the Feebas these blue Pokeblocks that are made from specific berries. And these Pokeblocks need to be crafted in a specific way so that they increase the beauty stat in a Pokemon, which is all a completely new system, right? So, I had every chance to give up here, right? But no, I chose to search for every Chesto and every Oran Berry, and then I would plant the berries in game, and I would have to wait hours for them to grow. Then I would take these berries and I would mix them and I would create a blue Pokeblock, and then I would feed it to my Feebas all the way until its beauty stat was maxed. And then finally, once that was done and I leveled it up, it had evolved into a Milotic. Now, Milotic has just stuck with me for years. Milotic taught me at an early age of 8 that if you want to achieve a difficult goal, you need to believe, you need to push, and you need to work for it. Nothing comes for free. For that reason, Milotic will always be my favorite Pokemon. And you know what, guys? Even today, whenever I'm trying to achieve a difficult goal, whether it's grow my business or build a YouTube channel, every time it gets difficult, I think of my 8-year-old self, and I think if I could push through and get Milotic, then my 29-year-old self can get 100,000 subscribers or build my business or do anything that I set my mind to achieve. But you know what? That little story about Pokemon being difficult to acquire and rarity, I think it's important for people to understand because Pokemon has always had difficult rarities in the game, even back in 2003. And one of the best parts of the franchise is how insanely difficult they have made certain Pokemon or certain Pokemon cards to acquire. Guys, it's nothing new. It's always been part of the charm and the fabric of Pokemon. Having rare Pokemon and shiny Pokemon or extremely difficult pull rates is part of the fabric of what makes Pokemon such a unique franchise, and it's just always been that way. So when people complain about how expensive Moonbreon is, or the price of Giratina V Alt, I understand the pain of not being able to acquire your favorite card because you're priced out, but also it's part of the journey of goal setting and having something to aspire for. Pokemon taught me how to aspire and dream as a kid, and I still love that I still aspire to have these rare cards, and it's one of the most treasured parts of the franchise for me. As much as we hate the difficult pull rates and how hard they are to acquire, it's just nothing new, man. It's always been part of the game that we all love. That's why I think Pokemon is such a good investment as well, because they don't just gift you things in rarity. In a world where everything is being super simplified, Pokemon hold their ground and they still give us something to strike for, whether it's in their games or their trading cards. You know, this is why a lot of people worry about their collections, and then people say, oh, but what if Pokemon is not around in the future? Like, what if it's not popular anymore? What will happen to my current collection if Pokemon isn't around in the future? I mean, I get it, it's a genuine concern, and a lot of people have, and they always ask, will Pokemon be here within 20 years? Well, I answer that in this video right here, which I've linked for you. I cover Pokemon's history and I do a future forecast of the brand and the franchise, and I showcase some pretty cool data relating to that topic. Click that video, guys, and I'll see you there.